All right, everyone, welcome. It is good to have everybody here with us tonight in the chamber or watching at accgov.com or on YouTube. We are here for our Tuesday, January 14th, 2020 work session, and we have just 3 items on the agenda tonight, so don't get used to this. I will tell everybody, given what the work session agenda looks like for the next couple of months. The first presentation in just a couple moments will be our downtown park presentation, continuing a discussion we've had for a few months. Following that, we'll have Keith Sanders, our SPLOST administrator, up to talk about the Dudley Park Schematic Design Review. And finally, Marilyn Hall from Public Utilities will talk about our water reuse program, a fantastic program in Athens-Clarke County that will be benefiting us both economically and environmentally. So if I could first just ask Linda Ford or David Lynn from the Downtown Development Authority to come on up to the podium. I think we are just about ready to get going. Should there be some imagery on that screen? There we go. Look at that. All right.
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm David Lynn. I'm with the Downtown Development Authority. I'm joined tonight by Co-Director Linda Ford and Board Chairman Jason Leonard. And on behalf of the Board of Directors of Downtown Development Authority, we thank you all for including us and bringing us on as a partner for this exciting new downtown park. And I'm not going to say anything. We are very excited to have engaged WLA Studio, and principal with WLA, Keith Williamson, will be leading y'all on this discussion and taking your input on hopefully will be a preliminary concept plan for the downtown park. Keith?
Thank you, David. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I'm going to try to be cognizant of your time and move rapidly through this information out of respect for the other people on the agenda. But there is a lot of information. I have brought some notes, but it's not intended to be an overly formal presentation. So if there are questions, please feel free to interrupt and ask. But the purpose this evening is just to provide you all an update of where we are in the design process and to introduce our thought process and to introduce what we see are the great opportunities and also to solicit any feedback that you might have on this project. You all know the project site. It is currently the site of the new mural, Hot Corner in Athens Legacy. It is a surface parking lot, approximately 0.18 acres, which is the rough dimensions of a basketball court, just slightly bigger than that. So it's not a very large park. As you well know, this site was designated for study to become a park because of the new mural, might have initiated it, but also because of its centralized location makes it an awfully good opportunity to create a downtown located green space for our community. So the Downtown Development Authority engaged us to push forward the conceptual plans that had been presented onto the table, to truth them out, so to speak, and see how they would be implemented. And in our conversations, we got approval to really put the design through our typical firm design process to make sure that there were not any ideas left on the table, and also to open up the design process to a public engagement phase in order to collect information from the community so that their aspirations and expectations are also reflected in the plan. Our firm was founded 1984 by Dale Yeager. We are an environmental design firm that specializes in cultural and environmental design and stewardship. So a little bit about the design process. We think of ourselves as a research-based design firm. And so we kind of ran this site through how we typically approach a project like this, starting with the environmental history and then also looking at the social and cultural history of the site. And I'm not going to go into great depth in all of the image that I show, but a few interesting things about the environmental history. We looked at the geology, of not only the Piedmont, but of the Athens area. We identified the types of soils that are predicted to be underneath this site. It's mostly a sisal clayey loam that has really good infiltration rates if we wanted to make use of that for green infrastructure and stormwater filtration. Bedrock is probably gneiss, which is underneath, which means that the water flow from this site is probably mirroring the surface flow. So you can imagine what stormwater does on the surface from this site. That's probably also what's happening below ground, which affects our aquifers and the health of our streams. This site is actually kind of almost the exact top of the Tanner Creek watershed. So that's where all of this water ends up, both above ground and below ground. Cultural history, the slide in the middle, which is an old Sanborn map from the late 1800s. It is top left of that image, and it was the location of a stable and servants' quarters back in the early 1900 or early 1800s and into the early 1900s. And then by about 1926, we hadn't nailed down the exact date, it becomes a filling station.
Stables and servants for what?
The house faced Hancock, and it was this area of town was residential,
Right.
and there were big houses, and this was a full lot that stretched from, I'm making sure I get it, from Hancock all the way down to Washington. And so the house was up on the corner here where almost where the water department is now, and then the dependencies stretched out south with the stable facing Washington Street.
Do we know whose house it was?
We do, I don't know the name of the person off the top of my head, but they were actually running that down in the office.
Thanks.
Sure. We focused more on the ownership of this lot because it's pretty fascinating, but early on it becomes a gas station. The Gulf downtown filling station is what it was through most of its history, beginning in the mid-20s up into about 1970. And it wasn't just a single building, and again, this is a Sanborn on the left-hand side, and this is an oblique aerial looking at it. It was multiple buildings, and so a filling station occupied the corner of the property, and then between the filling station and the Costa building, there was a series of automotive repair shops. There was a tire service building in 1926, which you can see here. It became a parts and supply store. It became a auto repair shop, and it was pretty consistently used for those types of services for most of the century. The result of that is when we started looking at this, was wondering what's taking place under the ground. Because this was decommissioned in 1970, before the EPD's underground storage tank program had begun, there are no records of this lot in EPD. So we couldn't go back and say, well, storage tanks were removed, et cetera. So we engaged an environmental firm to do ground penetrating radar on the site and made sweeps back and forth looking for any subterranean evidence that might inform our decision-making and design. And we did identify 6 anomalies on the site. The large anomaly in the center of the site is more than likely a debris zone where maybe there was a repair trench or depressed pit that got filled in during demolition. Again, that's speculation. The 2 sites on the west side of the lot near the exit onto Lumpkin Street show all of the characteristics of underground storage tanks. They're small. They're about 3 feet wide, about 8 feet long. So they're probably old school gas tanks. And in fact, if you look back at the Sanborn map, they actually label the location of the gas tank storage systems that are in the approximate location of where we found these anomalies. So there are probably tanks there. They're probably small, old school tanks. And we think that that's kind of an interesting possibility, but we need to make everyone aware of it in order to take the next step of either trying to identify the soil conditions around those tanks or be prepared during the construction of the park to remove the tanks and remediate any soil. Because one of the programs that we would like to suggest for this park is handling all of the storm water on site, healing the site the best we can, being the best stewards of the environment of this site as we possibly can. In order to do that, we're going to need to make sure that we have good soils. And thinking forward, if we're going to have children playing here, we want it to be as healthy in a most holistic way as we possibly can. I don't know why I brought notes. I'm not even looking at them. So then, the next thing we did was engage the public. And we had 3 outreach efforts. One, we had an in-person open house at the planning department, which was a visual preference survey where people could come and place dots on different features that potentially could make their way in the park, different types of seating, different types of arbor structures, different types of activities from yoga to splash pads to band stages, etc. And we collected that information and prepared a report for DDA. Then we did an online survey where we got about 900 responses, which we thought was pretty good. And I'll go through some of that information. I'm happy to provide you with all of the data output from the online surveys. I'll hit some of the highlights here in a second. And then we went to the Mayor's Youth Council, did a similar visual survey where they were able to interact on their telephones and vote for different aspects of the park. And after analyzing the information from those 3 outreach efforts, this kind of boils it down to the 5 main points that we saw. On the left, landscape and greenery. It was clear that the majority of people wanted this to be a green space. Over 50% of the respondents favored plants, landscaping, and green space in downtown Athens. And if I didn't note, I meant to earlier, I think it was 95% of respondents were very enthusiastic about the idea of having a downtown park. And the way that the plants and greenery, we also had questions about the ratios between hardscape and softscape, and how that influenced our approach to the design is recognizing that there needed to be more green space than hard space. A diversity of seating options. We asked about different types of seating, from fixed seating to seat walls to movable chairs, and everything kind of came down pretty much equal, 33, 33, 33. So we took from that something that I think is pretty prevalent in the industry right now, is providing a diversity of options for different users with different expectations from public space. Another priority that came through was making it a welcoming space for all members of our community, not designing it for late night use or just children, but making a space that is flexible and can be used for multiple activities for multiple user groups. There was a desire to make it a family-friendly park in order for families that visit downtown to have something to do, but it was clear in the responses that did not translate into a traditional children's playscape or a jungle gym, but something that was more innovative. And again, that leads us to thinking of spaces that are more flexible and can be used different ways, which comes back to the last thing, flexible programming. Now, one of the things that we did is we reviewed for our own design process some of the kind of standard documents on creating successful urban spaces. And Holly White's book, which is celebrating anniversary this year, is kind of the Bible for this type of urban design. Holly White, with a group of researchers, simply examined how people used small urban spaces and made notes and came up with with concepts that were prevalent in all the parks. So, for example, one of the things that Holly White shows in his research is that people like to move their chairs before they sit down. And it's usually less than an inch or two, but it's just that subtle adjustment that makes them more comfortable when they do sit down. Another thing is that people tend to move chairs to the outside of a space. They occupy the outside of a space before they occupy the inside of the space. A research firm called SWA actually revisited Holly's concepts because there's been a lot of talk in our profession about the changes that have taken place over the last 40, 50 years, in particular the prevalence of technology amongst our young people, and how does that influence how people from different age groups interact with public spaces. And a lot of White's theses and conclusions still hold true today, but this research outfit, SWA, kind of updated Holly's work. And so we actually reviewed that in order to make sure that that information was reflected in the conceptual designs as we moved forward. So for example, where Holly White would have said that people occupy the outside of a space before the inside of a space, they translate that into the concept called the donut effect. Lizarding is on the top left is a pretty self-explanatory that people, in particular younger people, are drawn to soft surfaces in order to recline in the sun. Other concepts that are reflected in our designs, and I will try to point these out as we go through. One is called pit stopping, which is the lower left, which means that, again, observable data shows that when people are traveling down a path, a sidewalk, they tend to stay on that path unless they are offered inviting opportunities to depart from that path in order to sit down. Otherwise, the natural inclination is to move through a space. Similarly, lazy joy is when people sit down, they like to prop their foot on something. And so as designers, that gives us an opportunity as we design seating to try to design it in such a way, and this is a little harder than the other ones, in order to provide a place for a person to perch their foot. So once we began to develop what our principles were for this space, we began cranking out different concepts. And we had multiple people in the studio simply working independently, knowing that these are the objectives based on the public engagement process. You know, here are the elements of a successful social space in an urban environment, so go at it. And we presented to the DDA a total of 6 concepts and sat down around a table, ran through it with them, and these were not intended to be either-ors. We were consciously trying to show different strategies, multiple strategies in each concept in order to see what appealed to them and what they thought would lead to a successful space. And out of those 6, we like a little bit of this one, we like this corner and that one, we really like the entrance here. And so we took that back, cut the pieces up, and put it all back together, and those are the 3 refined concepts that we're going to show today. Concept A is a departure from the initial concept that you all approved for this project to move forward. It is a combination of a depressed green space with a slightly elevated patio platform on the eastern end adjacent to the Costa building. That's a raised plaza area that is multifunctional. It can serve as a place to have chairs and tables. It can also serve as a special event space as necessary. It is accessed through stairs from the lawn panel, but it's on grade with the adjacent sidewalks for accessibility. We've expanded the plaza space on the corner in order to try to encourage entrance into the site. Again, that's one of those principles of how do you actually draw people into a site, and activating the corner of an entrance into a public space leads to more occupancy. A variety of seating in addition to movable chairs perhaps on the plaza area. We've integrated seat walls throughout the side, and the plantings are predominantly trees and shrubs that are expected to be part of a bioretention area. In these graphics, the dark green area is typically grass, because we did utilize turf in a lot of spaces because it's soft and allows itself for a flexibility of uses. Pavement areas, haven't been completely detailed out, but those are the gray areas. And I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory. The pedestrian access points are illustrated by these arrows. So that is concept 1, and this is an axon
I have a question.
SketchUp. Yes, ma'am.
Would there be issues with flooding with the depressed green space?
Well, no, because it would be graded out towards the patio. So there is a slight grade slope in this image, from the right to the left. And so surface water in this scheme would come out over this patio area. What we want to do, and you'll see this more in some of the other, and we actually have concepts that show this, is have runnels that would collect the stormwater and take them into the planting beds. Because of the size of this site and the fact that it is currently asphalt, it would be a derelict of our design to allow any drop of water to leave the site. It's really easy to capture it all here. Yes?
I'm concerned with the different elevations in these areas and ADA accessibility.
Well, I think it's a super good point. In defense of elevated areas, and these may read, we're staying, the highest wall that you will see in any of these is less than 3 feet. We feel like that's kind of the threshold for height. The seat walls that you see around the trees are closer to 2 feet tall, so somebody can sit down on them. All of the areas are accessible, so the upper stage area, which is only probably 2 feet above ground, is accessible from the Washington Street sidewalk. And then the plaza area below is accessible from the corner. So I agree with you that the spaces need to be accessible, and I'll try to show how we've accomplished that. But having a variety of heights in spaces help activate a space. So for example, one of the principles of both Holly White and SWA's research is that there's two of related one. One is perching, where people like to find slightly elevated spaces, and younger people under 35 like to go 3 feet up, and then the other parts of our community like to go 2 feet up. So it's just a slight rise, but they will be drawn to a slightly elevated space. So if we have some vertical complexity in a site, I think you will see more distribution of activities and more attraction of different people to do different things. But that's a good point. Yes, sir.
I'm assuming the answer to my question is yes, but for all of these options, I'm assuming that if and when the mural needs to be touched up, none of these will impact that. Is that
I
correct?
don't believe so.
Okay.
I'll be honest, where I have not been privy to those discussions. There may have been people in the studio that actually talked about, can we get scaffolding up against this wall? I mean, that's an interesting thing that needs to be considered. So I'll make sure it gets on the list.
And they used a cherry picker before.
Yeah, obviously this one, but we do have other ones that have plantings along that edge for a specific reason, but nothing that I think would prohibit repair and maintenance to the mural. Option B, Option C is going to be a little more formal, so we wanted something a little less formal. And the genesis of this concept was looking at those geology maps and plant community maps of this area of the Piedmont and trying to use those forms and the idea behind kind of successional and emergent plant communities to inform this design. So the idea was an abandoned field, plant communities push out towards the center and kind of represents a change in growth and a change in a community, which we felt like this area of downtown tells that story as well. So it attempts to replicate the cultural history of this area of downtown in an environmental design. It is built upon native prairie plant communities is what will occupy the planting spaces, and then what you see as yellow are seat walls that replicate the igneous formations that kind of penetrate and create the unique geology of this area. Other features of this design is a combination of different seating strategies, both the seat wall, the concrete seat walls that can also kind of double as exploratory, low-tech play area for children's, a significant amount of turf in the center of it, but a very active edge around that center area. Also, one of the SWA concepts is keen on glean, and people are drawn, especially younger people, are drawn to mirrored surfaces. You see that, you know, the chrome bean in Chicago is just, you know, just draws people to it because people like to take pictures of themselves, and they also like what's even best is if you have a reflective surface that a person can take a picture of themselves with something interesting in the background. And so we felt like with the mural here, it offers an opportunity for people to put themselves in the mural, and it helps serve a kind of a changing audience that is being shown to be attracted to this type of design strategy. All of these concepts have flexible performance spaces, nothing that is hardly programmed only for performance space. In this instance, it's a not a raised platform, but an open area that can become the location of a portable stage. So, an axon of that looks something like this. The edge, another strategy that is successful for activating urban spaces is really embracing the edge of a plaza. A lot of people like to sit on the edge of an active pedestrian zone. In this instance, it would be Washington Street or Lumpkin Street, and be observers. And even those who are not actively observing pedestrians are drawn to spaces that look out into pedestrian spaces. So that's one of the reasons that the edge of this is so heavily activated in this concept. The third concept, it began as a reflection of the four corners of Hot Corner, kind of twisted 45 degrees and then slid into the center in order to kind of reference the cultural geography of this side of downtown. And then it became played with as we began to apply more of these design strategies from Holly White and SWA. The landscaping is predominantly turf with perimeter bioinfiltration borders. So this is another one of those examples where the grading will shed water to the south and west into specifically planted and structural soil areas. So all of the water gets filtered and cleaned prior to entering into the substrate and then making its way to the aquifer or more than likely Tanner's Creek. Other elements of this is the back, what I think of as the back, which would be the north side, has a slightly elevated raised plaza. And what that does is appeal to these design principles that, again, people like to be perched slightly elevated. They also like to be facing the sun in those locations. For families and parents, this provides them with an observation area to be able to watch their children. The southern and western edges are planted with benches in order to create a sense of safety and security for families. And then we have provided a stage area that's slightly raised, probably 3 steps up. There you can see the ramp, so it is accessible from all directions. It's an elevated ramp, which creates the need for a slight wall that can double as a seat wall. And then in front of that stage area, we've placed, and you can see it probably better in here, a series of mounds in order to just create a little topographic interest in the ground plane. They're not very big, but they provide younger children a place to explore and roll around and going back. We also have placed, for the lack of a better word, stacked logs and stumps in order to create an exploratory play area for children that also doubles as seating for a small stage event, a performance event. A larger performance event obviously would spill out towards the rest of the space, but because of the elevated stage, we feel visibility would be no problem. Here's one where we have perennial planting beds. We'll have to look at that. My guess, just looking at this is probably about 5 feet deep, so shouldn't be an obstacle to maintenance. But again, I think that's something to think about in future iterations of this design. And where we are headed is based upon feedback and conversations that we have with you today. I think I've got so that all 3 of them are up. What we would like to do is, in coordination with David and Linda, is push one of these general concepts, which hopefully reflects the direction that you feel like this space needs to go, and push it to a 50% construction package so that we detail out every square inch of this place. We know what all the materials are. We know what all the furniture options are. Something that I did not mention, and I don't know if y'all want to talk about this, but the sculpture that's being proposed for this site. Do you have any?
A Harold Rittenberry sculpture has been donated for this site, and it's being housed by the folks that donated it. They would love to see it on this site.
And so, for example, in all of these concepts, we have integrated places where we think a sculpture would be appropriate and not detract from the mural. So, for example, in option C, that medallion on the ground, which would serve as the entry point into this space, is kind of designated as this is a good spot for a piece of sculpture. Yes, sir.
Are you asking for feedback now?
Listen, you can give me feedback whenever.
If you stay the mic that way on television,
Yeah.
I'll be able to hear you.
Well, just my own personal preferences. I kind of like option B because there, with those little walls, there's lots of places for people to sit. And I think that's what people like to do, is, especially if it's a nice sunny day, is go and get a sandwich or something and just kind of sit there and just hang out. And the others are fine, but personally I think giving those little walls are neat for people to be able to sit down. One of the questions I do have, though, is the tables and chairs. You said that people like to sit in a chair and then kind of move it an inch or so just to get comfortable, which suggests to me that obviously that they're not going to be bolted to the ground, which also suggests to me that there's a potential for them to grow legs and walk. So how are you going to address that?
Well, I think we design a space where we want to raise the expectations of how people are going to treat this space. That'd be one thing. I would love to see us at least experiment with the option of having unfixed movable furniture, because it is proven to be a much more successful and leads to more occupancy and user satisfaction. I don't think, in none of these options, in fact, we've talked about it, and we knew this question was going to come up. And all of these, the ground plane surfaces where the majority of the seating is designated is a hard surface, either a paver or a porous concrete or a traditional concrete. And so we could retrofit fixed furniture if that becomes a problem.
Jerry, you had a question?
Yes. I also prefer option B, but just stepping back a little bit, I think you've designed some possible good rooms, but we're in the context of this location, we're ignoring it, I think. This is hot corner. And the Costa building next to it is going to have a future too. I think these three things, the location, well, three things, the mural, park, Costa, should be considered in context with one another. We have an opportunity to build something that has pull and gravity to it. For me, I mean, I would just love us to take the context of being at Hot Corner and honor it. And maybe our sculpture should be something about Black history or Black in this community. Maybe Costa Building should be a Black History Museum. And now we've got something that really has a theme to it. So I know that's kind of stepping back a little bit, but I just think we have an opportunity here we may never have again anywhere in the city.
If I could piggyback off of that really quick, speaking of sculptures and amenities in this space that speak to the cultural legacy of the area, there's been some interest expressed by some community members that we bring the EJI lynching marker to this space as a way of honoring the folks who've lost their lives to terrorism previously in our community. And
So just as you think about whichever of these designs ultimately advances, we probably want to think about a couple of sculptural sites. I know about the scale of the Harold Rittenberry piece, and I would anticipate you could probably fit a couple things on the site given its scale.
Sure. I mean, these are all things that we've considered, and I think they're all good suggestions.
Yep, Melissa?
Yeah, I also like option B the best. I do have some concerns. Those walls, it's kind of hard to tell from the rendering if they're actual seating level or if they're more like to encourage that climbing up a few feet. I also feel like they kind of divide the space up a little bit too much, so maybe if they were more perforated, if those were smaller islands that allowed for more ability to traverse through the space from any direction. I like the shade. I'm a big concern with me in this space is the need for shade. This is like April through October, mid-afternoon. It's getting beat down by that afternoon sun.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And we went through different designs that provided shade in multiple ways, because I live here too, so I agree with you. One of the challenges is not overplanting it to obscure views of the mural, which really needs to be the highlight
And
of
I think that this does a good job of that. It maintains lots of shady areas, but it also does keep it open enough with a good view of the mural. As far as sculptures go, I think there's lots of opportunity for sculpture here, and I think that, that can be a whole separate process of how we handle the art and any thematic approach to the site. If we can, get an idea of how we want the space to feel, then we can have a whole new community process about what the site means and what kind of narrative we inject the site with.
And can I piggyback on that? And I'm open to any and all suggestions. I think that when we look towards adding things like along this line of sculpture, one thing that we might consider is non-permanent sculpture, because there's this there's this attraction to ephemeral changes in a place, and so if we have kind of rotating art in a place like this, that gives people new reasons to come, and all we need is we need them to enter and then feel good, and then they'll stay. And if we have fixed sculpture in there, that's one thing, but if we developed a strategy towards change, I think it would make it a more active for long term.
Well, I think that can be a whole separate conversation. I mean, I think that, that's a very complex conversation, and if we can just hammer down the space itself, and the functionality of it, we can move on to, a more complex and inclusive community conversation about the particular art elements and any meaning that they might have. But I do like B the best. I made a bunch of notes, and it mostly had to do with those walls and the need for them to be more perforated, and the ability to move across the space from more directions.
Easy to do. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, it's sounding like we have like some consensus, because I also prefer B. The only thing that I thought that I'd like to see a slight change would be the performance space that would be in that one. If there'd be a way to make it slightly more formalized,
Sure.
in which it seems like A and C have more. I mean, obviously it's not going to be the level of A, but just something that's a little more defined, because I do definitely see, especially in the spring and summer months during a lot of our festivals, this space will probably be utilized for performances. If it was just that was structured a little bit more, so it encourages that, maybe having like some movie nights and stuff in this green space, I think that'd be good.
Tim, are you thinking about maybe a raised element to accentuate their notion of that as being a
which
stage
C
for-
has, yeah, and so not as large as A, but yeah, something that's a little bit more raised and a little bit more formalized and obvious and fits that purpose. But then the last one I want to have is, I definitely don't want us to try to feel like we have to squeeze everything into this park, because I'm really hoping and believing that this is going to be the beginning of a growth of a green space movement in our downtown. This is just going to be the first of a number of these kind of things that we're going to be doing. So I don't want us to think like we have to put everything into this one, because I'm hoping we'll have this, we'll have something on College Square, possibly a larger one on the north side of downtown. So just keeping that in mind as we talk about it.
Russell and then Andy.
I like the third option the best. I like the symmetry of it. I like the way that the walkway sort of connects the two corners. I can see pedestrians, cutting through the park and walking through the park. I like how the stage area is more defined. And most importantly, I like that I see some intention put towards family-friendly infrastructure downtown. Something we've all been talking about on this body for a while now. The lack of attractions and opportunities for children in our downtown area. And this is the one design that has play and seating features within that design. Not to say it can't be put elsewhere, but I like how the stage area is defined, and it just looks like a more intentional, beautiful, symmetrical design. But I'll be okay with the second one. But I just like everybody to kind of give a fresh look to the third one. You could put a statue right there in the middle, right in the middle of that square that leads to the tiered seating. I can just see. I could see this really being used by pedestrians just trying to cut a few minutes off their walk, or cut a minute off their walk, traveling through this area of town, getting drawn into the space. I think that'll be a little bit, we might not see as much of that in the second option, with all the sort of walls that require perforation.
And I will say that what you just described was part of the initial thought process. There were two kind of concepts that were pushing the location of that park, or of that sidewalk. One is having a cut-through into a plaza increases the number of people that actually sit in a plaza. Yeah, it's just proven data. And then secondly, it references the canopy of the historic gas station. So, you know, once we started playing with the gas station, everything lined up. So those are kind of the two thoughts behind it.
And, you know, when it comes to the sculpture, I'd really like the sculpture to be a piece of functional art, you know, for us to get creative with that piece, something that kids could play on, swing on. We really need something for kids downtown. So here's an opportunity.
Andy?
So another question I had, and it kind of relates to Melissa's point, because I too also think that shade is really important. And I've been in plenty of places, you know, during the summer where it's really nice to sit in a particular location for a certain part of the day, and then the sun moves across the sky, and it's really a very unpleasant place to sit. So has anybody modeled where the shadows will fall vis-a-vis the buildings?
Yeah, all these are in SketchUp models, so we've run them through all of that. And
So you know where the shadows will fall at different times of the year, at different times of the day?
And we've kept the open relatively open, and then the edge relatively canopied and shady. So there's a diversity of spaces. You don't see in any of these concepts, you don't see a lot of trees in the middle. But all those areas where seating is, you see a lot of trees, and it's mostly on the edge. But yeah, I mean, once you get these things into SketchUp, it's just hitting a button, and it just shows you.
Well, I mean, I know there are computer things that can model where the sun is on a particular time on a particular day and what that
Yep.
means with shadows and
That's what
stuff.
all these have done.
Okay, good.
I'll just throw in my pile on to option B. I think there's sort of a magnetism to that option. It sort of invites you into the space, particularly given the seating there. And I like that you bleed from the sidewalk into the space, and particularly given that we are going to have to make decisions about use of not just the Costa building, but also the former bus ticket kiosk. You know, should there be some food and beverage component or something like that, you'd have an immediately adjacent space to sort of take advantage of the sandwich or beverage that might be offered at one of those establishments. And I think, sort of like Tim noted, you know, if you just had a slight elevation to maybe sort of a circular area in that northeast corner, you know, that would that formalize the performance possibilities there.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And just to jump onto this with that Commissioner Edwards brought up, because I also definitely liked the creative seating, especially the hills. I've been at some other parks and green spaces that have had that element. It makes this an interesting place for kids to play, but it also does that lizarding, I think, as you called it. You end up seeing that. People just like, it gives you a nice little back prop that you can prop up there in the grass and read a book. So I definitely, if we could have that element pulled into the B somewhere, I think that would be really neat. And Commissioner Link brought up that, yeah, there's definitely in the B some possible green space maybe down in the bottom right corner that there could be interactive sculpture or something included there.
Where the benches are
Yeah.
kind of facing inward, right below the mural. Because that mural is pretty high up. I think it's a good 10 or 12 feet before. So you could get a decent sculpture, climbable sculpture there and not impact the view of the mural at all.
One of the things that emerged just in the conversation when this wall was selected as the site for the mural is, you know, discussed with the artist, the prospect of having the image pushed as high on that scape as possible to allow almost a story of other interaction below, kind of knowing that there was going to be something here. Of course, not knowing that that'd be a park, but, you know, that means that at least, you know, body wouldn't be blocking a significant element of the mural. Feel like you've got a
Yeah.
good set of feedback?
I mean, that was actually awesome. Yeah, it was good. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? All right, thanks a ton. We
Yes,
really
sir.
appreciate the work. Looking forward to
Oh, this is mine. Let's take this.
doing some lizarding out here. All right, from one park to another, a long, long, long time park in the evolution is Dudley Park. That's also going to have some new features associated with it. And particularly given the emergence of fireflies, not too difficult to get to from the parcel that we were just talking about. So Keith Sanders, our SPLOST program administrator, is going to take us through some new Dudley options.
There we go.
Giving away Tim's cookies.
All right, Keith, thanks for being with us.
Sure, good evening. Thank you for having me, and we are here to talk about the Dudley Park schematic design. As you may recall, schematic design is the last step in the design process that we bring back to Mayor Commission for approval before we move on to the construction document. So this is really the last time to make any changes without some significant cost to the design. So we'll go through a little bit of the history, the design, budget, and then what our next steps are proposed, and then, of course, questions and comments. I'm certainly not going to read all this to you. We did start this design process back in June of 2018. We've gone through some extensive public input, user group sessions. We've got some grant opportunities that have come up that we have got Mayor Commission input on and applied for that we haven't received notice on yet. And then staff and the design group has completed their level of schematic that we're bringing to you tonight. Just to back up slightly, one of the steps was that in 2018, y'all did approve the revision to the master plan. That was this document. I know you can't read all of those elements, but we're going to go through those that apply, but this was approved. As shortly after that, Mayor Commission approved a prioritization of the project concept elements that we received from the public input part. That's that white chart on the right. The must-have elements that are not grayed out are the ones that we're talking about in the schematic design. We believe that those are the ones that we can afford based on the budget. And even with that, we're still asking for a slight increase in the budget. The others will have to come as other SPLOST programs or other funding comes available down the line based on the priorities that we have. The numbers that correspond to these correspond to the key legend on the master plan, not necessarily a prioritization number. So the area we're really talking about doing most of the improvements is to the south of the Firefly Trail. And just to orient you slightly, each of the slides have a couple of color-coded points that show up the same. We have a Georgia Power easement that cuts through the park. We have the existing Firefly Trail that goes through the park and comes to an end where the new bridge is under design will start. And then we also have an existing piece of public art that was put here as part of the Firefly Trail when it was built. When the Firefly Trail was put in, we also did put in a concrete pathway that accesses down to the park and created half of this circle that we're going to talk about a little further. We already in the park had a granite wall, retaining wall that circled a drive that's been there for some decades, and it was there when the dance center was there and other improvements were there. The dance center used to be on this park. Of course, it's now over at East Athens Park. And then there's some existing retaining walls from that building that would be removed, and also a parking lot that would be removed. So the proposed schematic design overlaid to that existing documents, we still got the Georgia Power easement shown in blue, the existing Firefly Trail, and the existing piece of art. Schematic design has a couple of different elements to it. Predominantly, the main improvements would be the addition of a restroom space, sort of a paved plaza space, and also a picnic pavilion that could be used for 50 to 60 folks at tables. And then we did put back a couple of parking spaces for handicap parking if there are events or something that's going on in the pavilion. Parking and drive access to this is through a typically locked gate, is by staff access only. So it's not as if we would have the general public driving up and using these spaces, but if you did have a birthday party or an event or a rentable event going on here and you needed some ADA spaces close by, staff could open the gate and allow those to be used. Also, we have a paved section in the middle of this circle area to be able to, ultimately was looking for a festival field, amphitheater type space. Long-term, perhaps putting some sort of structure there, but that's not in the budget for this at this point. What we are looking for in here is a paved surface to be able to move the new showmobile into. We also have some probably grass paved areas to be able to move the stage across, but still have grass within the circle. And then the circle would be repaved. We'd probably have to do some grading and tear up a portion of that in order the trucks would pull in and then be able to back the stage into that circle. And also, we're looking at doing a completing of the circle with a concrete sidewalk with some steps. We have ADA access from the Firefly Trail into the park via this half of the circle at grade with no steps. It does have slope, but that completely meets the ADA access. And then, so this would have some steps in order to allow us to reduce the amount of grading since we have the access other places. So we would propose to price this as an alternate in case the rest of it, as we go through the final design, becomes too expensive. This could always be added back later. We have right here in the center a fairly large transmission power line pole that we have to design around, have to work around. We can't do a lot of grading next to it or near it. So that is the reason for the steps. Instead of trying to grade at slope, we'd have to put too much fill against that power pole, and that Georgia Power would not allow that. So as we move on in the schematic, we do have to do a little bit of stormwater work. We'll have to do some collection, and then because this is a low area in this circle, and if we're going to be backing the showmobile across it, we need to be able to drain it. We'd spread that on site. We don't have to do, we don't believe treatment's going to be required. We've got plenty of distance before the river to spread that and allow sheet flow across the ground. We'd have bike racks. We'll get to the restrooms in pavilion. So the restroom is a 4-stall. It'd be individual restrooms, gender neutral, and then we'd have some storage space. It's an economical design, but we think we can certainly jazz it up and make it look nice. It would have a granite, plan as a granite water table, which is the bottom, roughly 3 feet, 30 inches to 3 feet. Probably cement board and batten siding, metal roof, metal trim, trying to make it as low maintenance as possible, keep those operating costs down. LED lighting, we would have water fountains with bottle fillers, pet fountain. The picnic pavilion probably can get 8 tables in the 6 to 8 foot range with ADA seating at them. Again, metal roof, similar construction, granite on the bottom of the columns, and most likely wood timber construction. Some overall images of what we're looking at. Again, we're looking at this grassed plaza area out here for play activities, not really a formal space with equipment or anything in it, but a field that folks can come and just have a good time. It does have some slope to it. We're looking to limit the amount of grading as much as possible with keeping that slope so that it focuses down towards where the mobile stage would be moved. Trying to limit how much we disturb within the site to as little as possible, keep that cost down, but still get the impact with the improvements that we're trying to achieve. Budget, the 2011 budget that was originally passed was $970,000. We've spent some or encumbered some on design. We've dedicated money for public art. We've set aside a little bit of contingency, which leaves about $650,000 for construction. Our estimate at this point is $890,000 for the improvements that we've shown you. So we would be asking in the agenda report for $240,000 to be moved from the jail project into this project. So the next steps in February would be asking for approval of this schematic design, a budget amendment to move the $240,000, and then also to advance the project to construction using our own call contractor and in-house staff so that we could get it completed by early fall of 2020.
It's in Commissioner Parker's district and then Commissioner Link.
Cool, thank you, Mayor Gertz. I think one of the first things I maybe ever said as a commissioner was asking about basketball courts at this location. I know that there were some topographical problems with like locating it either where the fly trail currently exists or the UGA parking lot that is adjacent to this property, but it seems to me like there is an opportunity to incorporate that around where there's the hardscape plaza area. And I was wondering if there's any reason why that's not feasible.
It wasn't part of the program master plan when the master plan was approved.
Yeah.
I don't think that plaza space is as big as you think it is for a basket, if you're thinking this area.
Yeah.
Or, let's see, if you, maybe. I mean, this is a parking spot, and you compare
I
that to the
see.
rest of this, you're really not looking at an area big enough to do parking. We're also, one of the bigger probably reasons is one of the reasons is trying to limit the amount of impervious surface that we add to the,
Sure.
to the park because of the stormwater requirements that go with it.
Yeah.
And mostly it's not in here because it wasn't in the master plan when that
Yeah,
was
I remember
approved.
being told back when we approved the master plan that there'd be opportunities to get that in here, but this seems like we are nearing the end of that journey. So I wanted to just speak up about that while we're here and see if there's any opportunity to incorporate that, because you don't see a ton of children out here. I think this will open up more opportunities for play and invite people into the space, but you especially don't see children of color in this space, and you 20 years ago would have most certainly. And I think that locating some amenities here that we know that folks use in other parts of the district who maybe aren't or haven't been brought into the public input processes thus far, but certainly would appreciate having here is important and not too late to do.
If you don't mind me addressing part of the discussion we've had with both citizens and with staff, is that if you take a direct line from this park, there's actually 3 outdoor basketball court opportunities that are not that far away between the East Athens Community Center, Lay Park, and over at Reese and Pope Park. They get used, but it's not like they're so saturated that we're looking for additional within that same proximity. So we've been trying, and with the tight space that we have here, you have to separate basketball courts from something like a picnic shelter because of the noise and oftentimes the competitive spirits that go on during an outdoor basketball game, especially when it gets to be teens and adults. You need to separate that from something like a shelter if a group's trying to have an outing that's there. So we're a little bit restricted in, as he's saying, in the site that we have designated there.
Okay. I don't really know if I believe that. I know that like at Lake Park, there's a picnic shelter a stone's throw from the basketball facility is right there. And those aren't that's not, and Lay Park is not walkable for kids living over by Trail Creek. You know, that's not reasonable for like an 8-year-old, 12-year-old kid to do. So I'm gonna keep pushing on that.
Melissa?
I'd like to keep pushing on that as well. I remember raising this question when we approved the master plan, or I guess when there was some change to it. It was before Commissioner Parker was on board. I'm wondering why basketball courts can't be put where that showmobile is intended to be parked. Over in Bishop Park, they use basketball courts for a farmer's market. it can be a dual space. I mean, what's going to happen with that space when there's not a showmobile there? Because I can imagine that the showmobile is only going to end up there a handful of times a year. I'd like us to consider, having a dual space that can be used for that. I guess basketball courts are typically enclosed. Is that the issue with that?
No, there's just very limited flat space. This is sitting on top of a hill, and again, that space is probably only about the size of maybe a smaller half court. It's nowhere.
Half court's fine.
Nowhere
I mean,
close to even a full court.
I mean, it's just I've spent Sunday afternoon in Dudley Park. It was a beautiful sunny day, and I was there at least an hour, and I think I might have seen one person of color, and I'm pretty sure he was a college kid. I'm also really concerned about the trees there, especially in this area. I used to hang out in this space before Firefly Trail went through there, and there was lots and lots of trees, plenty of opportunity for shade. Right now, that stretch of Firefly Trail is just completely uncomfortable, for a good portion of the year because of the lack of trees. So I'm wondering what the tree planting plan is, not just for the comfort of the space, but I'm thinking about climate change as well. It's really important that we take every possible opportunity to plant trees. Are there plans for trees in this area?
All of the circles that are added are trees of some sort. The exact variety has not been selected. There is still a large wooded area on this hill on this side of the Firefly Trail, and the section through the Georgia Power easement. They trim the trees back or clear them back to this clouded line.
Well, that's
towards
all the more
river.
reason for us to add more trees, I would think.
But they're probably not going to allow us unless it's really.
In our area, the area that we control. If we have no control over this Georgia Power area where trees are not possible, I think it would be all the more reason. This is going to be a festival ground. It's not really. Festival season tends to be in the summertime, and when you really need your shade more than ever.
One of the reasons that we did not put trees in here is because it is supposed to be a play field or an activity field. In order to get good grass growth, we need it to not be shaded. And if you are putting a stage or having some sort of performance in here, ultimately this area on the lower section there was intended to be a playground. And so trying to maintain visibility if you're sitting on the sidewalk or walking on the sidewalk towards the stage, not having trees inside of the circle, and then limiting or adding the trees on the outside of the circle.
I would almost rather see a smaller or no picnic pavilion and include a basketball court. And, there's no reason why you can't scatter picnic tables amongst the surrounding area. It's pretty level all through there, those trees right at the bottom. I just think I'm wondering what the history is. When were the basketball courts removed and why? What was I've had conversations with folks who live in that neighborhood it's a sore spot for them that there are no basketball courts in this park anymore.
Keith, I was wondering, so it already came up a little bit of trying to do some multi-uses here. I'm thinking of in Bishop Park, we had the pavilion over the tennis courts, which of course is now the home of the Athens Farmers Market. And I'm wondering if we could somehow utilize the pavilion space to when it's not, to maybe it's not permanently a pavilion. It's able to be a pavilion when it's reserved, and we can pull the tables out or something like that. But otherwise, it operates as a covered basketball court, which I don't think we have any of in Athens, actually. Yeah, covered ones, right? It'd be kind of nice, even if it was just a half court. Just to utilize that space in multiple ways. And of course, whenever it is reserved for an event, then no basketball at that time, and then we don't have to worry about the noise competing between basketball and that because it's happening in the same spot. I wonder if there's a way that we could play with that, because I definitely hear I've heard the request for basketball courts, and definitely one for that is covered. would be, I think, great, since we have tennis courts that serve that.
What's the pavilion size relative to the basketball court or even a half court?
If I have it's about the same size. It may be slightly larger, which is probably maybe about a half court size, about the size of where the showmobile is. Yeah, and of course, we were not planning a structure anywhere tall enough
Yeah, it'd have to be much higher.
to put one, but,
Right, yeah. I was wondering if we could pull that off, you have to have it a little bit higher. But again, it ends up adding multiple elements that building can serve, therefore it's going to be utilized more often. I think it'd be a great thing for us to look into doing.
one of the items with trying to do the dual purposes is you do have to then have staff, someone to come move picnic tables in and out. And then when they're not in, where are they stored? And most of the other rentable pavilions, the tables are bolted down because they do tend to walk off, even as heavy as tables are. I think Kent can tell you that other parks, they end up creeks, ditches, leaving the site or getting moved, or so that when somebody does come in to rent it, and this was planned for very low staff interaction being added to maintain the site.
I
Yeah, this-
wonder if the added benefit, that an added use that we'd have, if it'd be worthwhile for the small additional cost. To me, I think it would. Yeah.
The pavilion right now is sized at 20 feet wide by 48 feet long. So it's about a little less than 1,000 square feet,
Do half court.
which is significantly, I guess, smaller than half court, but
Melissa?
I'm thinking of the setup at Rock Springs, which I really love the setup there, where you have a combined picnic pavilion and a restroom, and the playground's right smack there, and the basketball court is, just a stone's throw away. I'm wondering if this paved area could be approached in that way. That open area in the middle, is that just open plaza?
it's open plaza space. Was to have, the intent would be to have it trees and shaded for,
I mean,
guess-
I kind of wonder if that's even necessary in a park like this, where you do have some shaded open space along the edge there that seems pretty flat, I mean, I think we could make better use of this flat paved area to incorporate maybe a combined picnic pavilion, restroom, and a basketball court, covered basketball court, all one. I mean, you don't even have to build separate structures. Wouldn't that save a little bit of money?
We talked about that combined use. One of the concerns was that this is the only public restrooms along the stretch of Greenway and Firefly, so they're going to be heavily used by cyclists and walkers and families. So if you are a rental group, and keep in mind, we host anywhere from 50 to 60 nonprofit groups that are looking for staging space along our trails for their 5K runs. So they're very excited about this opportunity as well, and all the events that they put on. But to be able to separate those casual users of the restrooms from your group who has rented and paid for the space gives them a little bit of privacy, so people I know you can put restrooms or doors on the back side, but you still feel like you've got people coming into the space that you paid to use. So just trying to create a little bit of separation.
I mean, I kind of have a problem with the exclusivity of restrooms. I think the restrooms should just be public in general, and if you're renting a pavilion, you access the public restrooms.
Well, you will.
That's the intent of this, is the
But also the
restroom.
public's not feeling like they're intruding upon your birthday party or your group event, whatever it may be, because they've got access, they feel like they've got comfortable access.
I think it could be arranged where they were accessible to the public without entering into what might be a semi-private space. I just feel like this whole area could be arranged in a way that made it more multifunctional and incorporated what
So it's clear that the sort of core interest is in some basketball court programming. And I mean, in just kind of hearing folks talk, it's not of the competitive court kind of nature of programming. It's more sort of pickup game. And we've just even talked about half courts just now. Yeah, I wonder if, it would be an opportunity for leisure services just to look at the entire parkscape, maybe even including that sort of end of that snake of parking that's ACC parking. I mean, I was just checking on Q Public to see where the UGA and ACC divide was, and I see that, we have that sort of snake tail of parking. And maybe kind of leisure services through the manager could just identify any prospective basketball sites within the greater Dudley Park.
We can certainly do that. Sure. I know the proximity of parking to where you're going to play may be discouraging
Some issue.
to some folks, but, we can look into this.
All right. Anything else about the other elements of the park? All right, thank you all.
Okay,
I
thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks.
Sure.
And as Keith is packing up, I think our last presentation of the evening is going to be from Marilyn Hall from Public Utilities, who's going to talk about a long burgeoning project in Athens, water reuse, so that we can really kind of make more continued use of very significant resource. Stop for a second when you get to the 2007 photographs. That's interesting shots in there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm here to update you on the water recycling program. And I am going to step back and give some background on where our water comes from. I know many of you have heard me say this over and over and over again, but it's important to remember where our water comes from. I'm also going to remind everybody a little bit about our service delivery plan and how the risk assessment that we did in 2017 came out of that, and how the reuse system master plan came out of the risk assessment. So there's a method to my going on about the story that I'm trying to tell you. Also, I'm here to inform you and answer your questions. There's not going to be a vote related directly to this presentation, so there's no agenda report that's going to follow. I'm just here to answer your questions and remind you what we're doing. Where does our water come from? Comes from the Middle Oconee and North Oconee rivers and the Bear Creek Reservoir. And it's important to remember that we are 50 miles from the headwaters of these rivers, which means that we have a very small basin that our drinking water comes from, which makes us especially vulnerable to drought. This is by Ben Purton Park. On the left is the Middle Oconee River at normal flows. On the right was during the big drought of 2007. This is at our drinking water intake. It's just a little bit upstream. And the reason I'm showing you this is because next you see the Bear Creek Reservoir. The Bear Creek Reservoir we share with Barrow County, Jackson County, and Oconee County. They rely on this year-round. We typically are dependent on it during times of drought. Again, you see the 2007 drought, how low that water got. Depending on who you ask, we were down to between maybe 30 and 60 days left of drinking water, raw water, that we were sharing with 3 other counties. And we can't control how they use their water.
And just looking at those images, I had to do a double take when I was watching the presentation just to see, is that the same vantage point? You can actually see the same significant trees in the upper left in the background. It was dramatic at the time.
Yeah. And that was briefly drought and where our water comes from. And we do a 20-year capital improvements plan, and we update it on a 5-year cycle. We call it our Public Utilities Department Service Delivery Plan. It is based on our population projections and our economic development trends and goals in some ways. And from those, we develop our water and wastewater demands, and that serves the foundation of our service delivery planning. We look out, the plan is a 20-year plan, but we look out beyond that, which I'll show you in a minute. The other thing, the third item up there you see is system condition. You hear about America's crumbling infrastructure. I shouldn't say that, my boss might not want me to say that. But the system condition relates to our infrastructure that we have now that is aging and reaching the end of its life, and we have to plan ahead in that service delivery plan to rehabilitate and replace certain infrastructure. So that's the foundation of our service delivery plan. The most recent update was in 2015, and in May of this year, I will be presenting you the new update for 2020. Why am I bringing this up now? Is because in the 2015 service delivery plan, we projected out to 2050 our average water demands. This is our raw water demand. The black line up there you see is just over 25 million gallons a day, and that is our permitted withdrawals from the Bear Creek Reservoir. You see at 2050, we exceed our permitted withdrawal. So we think there's a reasonable chance that by 2050, given existing demands, will exceed. Essentially what this says is that we need to find more water somewhere by 2050, and probably before that, because there's about a 50% chance by 2050 our demands will exceed the permit.
And that's for our county alone.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Which
see
brings
what I'm
us,
getting at, yeah.
yes, I do see what you're getting at exactly. And that brings us to another issue, and that's drought. And that's why
Yeah.
the drought issue. So the Bear Creek Reservoir is controlled by the Upper Oconee Basin Water Authority. And that authority and the Environmental Protection Division can actually impose water use restrictions on us, the county. And the drought response levels you see up there are the Upper Oconee Basin Water Authority's response levels. And it's important to know this, that back in 2008, thereabouts, when we did that all outdoor water use ban, I think most of you will remember that, we could expect our water use to go down by about 25%. But now, since Athens, everybody is much more conservation minded, they're very efficient, people have changed how they use water outside. When we say an all outdoor water use ban, we can expect a reduction of about 13%. So about half of our water is used by residential customers, and that reduction from outdoor water use, the residential customers are impacted by that for the most part, which means that if we have to go into a drought response level 3 or 4, or God forbid 5, our non-residential customers will bear the brunt of that. And as a result, there are going to be some severe economic impacts, and that was what we studied when we did the risk assessment. And these are based on 2015 numbers. I imagine the impacts would be greater than they are now. And it says, while the probability of imposed reductions may be small, the economic impacts to the community are large. And in 2017, when we did this study, we calculated that at a 20% mandatory reduction in water use, we could lose $244 million in gross regional product and over 4,000 jobs lost. And there's some additional impacts that we don't really need to go into right now, but the probability, we calculated just under 5% in any given year, we could reach restrictions in the 3 or 4 level range. So it's not going to happen a lot, but when it happens, it could be really, really serious. And the recommendations from that risk-based assessment, I'm not going to read them because you can read them. Essentially, what it says is that in the future, or now and into the future, any big droughts are going to have a bigger economic impact than they have in the past. And that additional efficiency and conservation will help, but it can't rescue us from a big drought. So implementing a recycled water system and additional storage can protect us and give us drought resiliency for the next half a decade. To explain to you what the water recycling program is, I want to step back and talk about our existing system. It's intuitive to me, but not everybody thinks water all the time. So we get our water from the rivers, we treat it at the Beecham plant, and that we treat it to drinking water standards. We send it to our residential and non-residential customers. They use it, it goes down the drain, and it comes back to one of 3 water reclamation facilities. We treat about 11 or 12 million gallons a day and we treat that water, we reclaim it, and we send it back to the river. The North Oconee plant, just off College Station, it treats over 6 million gallons of water a day. We reclaim 6 million gallons of water from that facility. So if you think about water recycling, it's the exact same thing, but we take some of that reclaimed water and we pump it back up to our industrial customers where they can use it for their industrial processes or for cooling. And so we recycle that water. And if you think about it, if we have an industrial user who uses 1 million gallons a day of our drinking water for their processes and cooling, and we send them recycled water instead, it reduces our drinking water demand by that 1 million gallons. There's potential to, and also for economic development and to help with this drought issue, the restrictions on using that recycled water are not going to be the same as for raw water. So if we need to reduce our water use by 20%, that's raw water and drinking water. That's not recycled water. So what came out of this is the Water Recycling System Master Plan. You probably noticed that I'm starting to say more recycling as a word than reuse. And that is because this isn't a new thing all over the country, and people like customers and our residents will understand water recycling more than water reuse. So we're switching to water recycling as the term. The Recycling System Master Plan, I'll go through it really briefly. Essentially what we do is we pump reclaimed water, we add a little chlorine, pump it to the employment area in the northeast part of the county for the industrial facilities that are there. And then we pump it in the other direction also to the University of Georgia. And I'll explain that in a minute. There's also potential to use this recycled water and purify it to drinking water standards and introduce it before the Beecham Water Treatment Plant so we can actually use it to augment our drinking water supplies. I'm going to start out by, this is the northeast part of the county here is the Athena Industrial Park and the Athens Industrial Park. The star in the middle there is the North Oconee plant. The reason we have chosen those industrial areas is because they're really close to the North Oconee plant. So there's a huge opportunity to provide existing customers, drinking water customers with recycled water, and then also perhaps attract additional industries because of the additional recycled water. Right now, as far as implementation progress, the filters and phosphorus treatment and the recycled water pump station at the North Oconee plant, the preliminary plans were approved last year, and they should go out to bid within the next month or two. And that'll be the pump station for the recycled water program. Last year, you saw the Firefly Trail presentation by SWAST. It was a wonderful kind of collaboration where we worked together to get the purple pipe, which is the recycled water main, underneath the Firefly Trail on Winterville Road from Lexington Road to Indian Hills Road. And that will be going out to bid this spring. Also, as you know, the Loop and Lexington Road intersection, there's a GDOT project that's coming up in the next year or two. Our utility relocate program will include adding purple pipe through that intersection. So when we're ready to send water to the industrial plant, we don't have to go back to that intersection and re-dig it up. So the complete pipeline from North Oconee is on that map, and I think you guys should have a copy of it. This, what is not circled is going to be, well, I shouldn't say that. The purple part is in the service delivery plan as part of the Voiles Road sewer rehabilitation and upgrade. But anyways, this pipeline will be in the 2020 service delivery plan, so you'll have a chance to see it again in May with costs associated and whatnot. The other direction that we're sending the water is towards the University of Georgia, and it's really fortuitous, I think, for our program that the University of Georgia has started with their district energy plants. because the timing is really good. They will be our first big customer, and them being our first big customer will help improve the return on investment of this water recycling program, because we'll have a customer right off the bat, and that's really good. A lot of recycle programs don't have that opportunity. The next step for the pipeline to UGA is the preliminary design will be underway in the next couple of months, and it entails a pipeline from the North Oconee plant, following that line up to the new STEM building at the University of Georgia. And they have purple pipe in their design for that building, and I don't know if they've got it in the ground or not, but it will be in the ground within the next quarter, maybe this summer.
Excuse me, before you leave
Yes.
this map, last voting meeting, we discussed the fact that UGA was not going to finance purple pipe in one of our projects. Can someone show me where that purple pipe is relative to this purple pipe?
See it's up here. Yeah, so if you think of this is University of Georgia's like phase one of using the recycled water.
Yeah.
The other DET plant is up closer to downtown at Hull.
Okay.
And so the idea is they need a line, they'll be putting a recycled line at some point between here and there.
Yeah, just question how much commitment they're making. They're not willing to move forward with that project.
And I think there are two different parcels relatively close to one another, sort of off Baxter Street. I think the one that would receive near-term use that you showed in the photograph a moment ago is just north of Baxter Street, and then the project that we were looking at, sort of just south of Baxter Street.
Yeah, they're putting in about 1,000 feet, is that right? 1,000 feet of condensate line on Lumpkin Street that's more a direct shot between point A and point B, that they are going to be putting purple pipe in, I think, this summer. So they have made a commitment to do that. To be honest, that other part kind of went the other way towards 5 Points, and it doesn't make sense really for them to put purple pipe there because they want to get at the district energy plant. So that's just my opinion. I hope I'm okay with saying that.
Well, I mean, they're one of the greatest beneficiaries of this project in times of drought. I mean, they've got 10,000 employees and 40,000 students there who need water. And it seems to me like they should be aggressively pursuing this project. So it's just a comment.
Mayor, Manager, I mean, do we have any clarification since, I know it's only been a week, but on that, is it more so like that they just are deciding that they're not going to pursue purple pipe in that area? Because
I haven't heard
it's
anything
for-
about that segment south of Baxter Street.
Okay.
And I don't know if Glenn Coleman, Public Utilities Director, has any other information.
The intent was the university would extend at some point in time purple pipe on Lumpkin Street. And that may be years out, maybe 10 years before they go into the area that she was talking about south. What we were trying to do when we had the road torn up, putting in the sewer line, go ahead and include purple pipe. We bid that as part of the project that came in, I think it was $734,000. They elected not to do that now because they put it in the ground and sat there so long. Would they be ready to use it? What they have told us, they're going to go in and put purple pipe 1,000 feet she alluded to underneath the sidewalk. It will be out in the road. And they're going to do that. They'll start that earth some of it this year. So they are putting some of it in purple pipe, yes.
Okay, so they're just judging that right now, what we were voting on last week just doesn't make economic sense to them then at this
Doesn't
time?
make sense for them to do all of it now at the price we had, that we got when we bid the project out.
That purple pipe on Lumpkin south of Baxter, that's not in their future plan to connect to that district energy facility.
Going south, it's not.
Right, and that's gonna be the major user in that area is that energy facility.
That's correct.
Because, of course, the purple pipe is water reuse rather than potable water. And so, of course, that's the distinction, is that, some uses like the energy system can use non-potable water. But obviously, if you're going to teaching buildings, dormitories or the like, you're gonna want some safe water.
It's my understanding they did pay to plumb the new STEM building to be convertible to run non-potable uses off of this. So From my perspective, I've seen UGA making some investments. I think what you're talking about here is that they're not quite ready to put millions of dollars of infrastructure for things that may connect decades in the future or a decade. Whereas right now, they're going to start with the low-hanging fruit and observe benefits.
Well, it was only $734,000, so I'm sure it'll be cheaper in the future.
Well, it won't be cheaper in the future, but what they'll be able to know, I mean, right now, they don't even have pricing on what the reclaimed water will be.
Yeah.
That's a good point. If you look at the map, everything that she's showing in purple is what we'll be putting in as part of the reuse program. Everything in the red is what the university will be installing at their expense to do the STEM building and the power plant up there as well.
I know Commissioner Thornton had a question, and then Commissioner Harris.
Yeah, I guess I just need to make sure that I reiterate the concerns that everybody else is expressing. I got a text from Patrick that is concerned also about this investment, up front, and it just seems a little bit one-sided. Now, he didn't say that, now I'm saying that part, but that was his question about if the university was going to pay or put some money towards this, but now it just seems like we're kind of, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like this is a good partnership, just listening.
I guess I'd just make the specific note that it's clear that there are two facilities on the university campus that will be receiving recycled water. Part of just the reality of plumbing a building is that if you're going to use some non-potable uses within an older building, say the toilets, for example, that means you've got to get pipe into walls that might be 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. So, I think all of those are among just the simple construction considerations underway. But I would make a note that if you're thinking about real bang for anybody's buck, it's in those large system kind of applications, like in a heating and cooling tower. So, Andy?
Thank you. So just to broaden the discussion a little bit more, so you're talking here about the purple pipe being extended to Athena Industrial Park and then also out onto UGA's campus. I think Kelly and I are the only two people on the commission now that were here in 2007, 2008. And
Back in the dark ages.
I remember the drought, and it really was not much fun. And our industrial and commercial partners were really helpful in implementing a lot of things that really helped with conservation of water. But there's another part of the community that has some industry that uses a lot of water, and that's at the end of Chase Street with the chicken plants. So one of the things I learned was that it takes on average about 6 gallons of water to process a chicken. So what are the plans for at some point doing this out along into that part of town? Because those are important jobs, particularly because they're not ones that necessarily require, postgraduate education, those kinds of things. I mean, they're
Yeah.
well-paying manufacturing type
Absolutely,
jobs.
they're one of our biggest employers. Right now, we don't have plans to head in that direction, mostly because the North Oconee plant is so close to the other one. Getting a recycled pipeline to that chicken plant might be cost prohibitive. Doesn't mean we won't do it someday, but right now it's not in the plans.
Okay.
One of the things, just on the question of the gallons per bird, that I've discovered only because my wife now works in that industry, is that there are some federal requirements around the amount of water that has to be used per bird. So from my general understanding, that $20+ million upgrade that they've just undertaken has continued to move them in a more efficient direction, but there are simply some guardrails that keep them from moving, say, from 6 gallons per bird to 3 gallons per bird.
No, and that was kind of my point. There's some of the commercial and industrial partners that we have in the community, there's only so much they can do to reduce their use of water, and then at a certain point, you basically bottom out. And so for those kinds of industrial activities, the more recycled water we can use, as you point out, that provides that releases some of the pressure on potable water for drinking and cooking and bathing and that kind of stuff. So even though it might be cost prohibitive right now, and even though, you know, when the county comes around to thinking about it, I certainly won't be on the commission, but I'd really encourage in terms of long-term thinking to be thinking about that.
Excellent. And you make a good point. Our industrial users have become more efficient, just like our residential users. And asking them to reduce their water use beyond that will be way more difficult than it was back in 2007.
And just in real numbers, we're using somewhere on the order of 12 or 13 million gallons a day now, I believe. And I think in '07, prior to '07, we had peaks up to 18 million gallons a day. So
We had higher than that in
Well,
peak
there you
days,
go.
yeah, up in the 20s,
in the 20s.
yeah.
I'm
Melissa?
curious to know if it's required that water used to process chicken be potable. I kind of wonder, that's what I'm wondering, if there's no possibility of even hooking that kind of industry up to this system, which is all the more reason to reduce your meat consumption. If you want to make sure that that industry uses less water, reduce your meat
I
consumption.
think we can find out about that. Yeah, Tim?
Thank you. So I just had a couple of questions. I know that we're not at that point necessarily, but what is the expected difference in rates going to be for the recycled water compared to drinking water they have now?
We haven't determined exactly what they'll be, but they'll probably be around half of what our drinking water
Around
costs
half?
are. Right now, we're just using the reclaimed water from the plant. There's no additional treatment cost other than just adding some chlorine.
Okay, right. So I guess that leads to my second question, which was like, what is the cost to ACC pumping the recycled water compared to the drinking water? Is it much cheaper?
The water certainly is cheaper.
Yeah, so I guess I'm just wondering, like, the cost of us doing this. And so if we're getting like getting reimbursed for it half, is that how much of the cost of us actually putting this in place is that covering? Understanding that there's plenty of environmental cost here, and of course for the water sustainability. But yeah, just.
We expect the rates to cover the expense of the pipelines, of the infrastructure over time.
Over time.
Yeah, and we haven't done the cost analysis with the rates, and it depends when. This is actually one of the great things about UGA consolidating their plants now, is because hopefully by the end of 2021, we'll be getting income from the recycling program.
I think it's worth noting too, we are working on the rates now. We're looking to see what it needs to be in terms of our entire rate structure. And I think that's one of the things with the university, the reason they haven't been willing to step out and say, we'll do all this, because they're waiting to see what the rates are going to be. They make that kind of commitment to fund a lot of these big ticket items. But that's something that's in the works.
Also, part of this discussion is it's a fixed, limited resource, right? So you only have so many gallons you can pump environmentally or by permit. So every gallon you leave in the river is either available for environmental purposes or it's available for growth in the community. And that's a lot of why you see that projection line increasing, is not that they're becoming less efficient, it's that people are wanting to move here.
Good? Okay. And that leads me to remind you that there's also an opportunity to treat the water after we reclaim it, purify it to drinking water standards, and then put it into the drinking water cycle through the water treatment plant. So to summarize,
Where would that storage be?
we are still in the process of figuring that out. To summarize, in the next year, there's going to be a lot of activity for the water recycling program. Again, the pump station and filters and the Firefly pipeline will be going to bid next quarter, or this quarter, I guess it is now. The water recycling projects in preliminary design will be the pipeline to UGA and the GDOT interchange. And in just a few months, I'll be presenting to you the service delivery plan, which will have the rest of the recycling water program in it, the non-potable recycling program. Yeah.
So Marilyn, one big picture question, just really stemming from some comments that Andrew made. Once this is up and running, not the first day of use or the seventh day of use, but, when it's been in use for some period of time, does the reality of recycling some water have any impact on our downstream neighbors in terms of river flows?
Well, it reduces our withdrawals upstream, and it holds some of the water within our own water system, but we haven't done much study on the downstream impacts. I think there are other communities certainly that do water recycling with little impact downstream.
Okay. And I anticipated that, given, again, that holding pattern, that reduction in freshwater intake in the first place. But I guess I just wanted some verification, so I'll probably circle back to that point when we're in the service delivery plan discussion.
Well, presumably at some point it all goes back into the river to go downstream.
Yep.
We just get to use it twice rather than once.
Yeah, and in some cases, and this is criticism sometimes about over-reliance on reservoirs, you've got some evaporation that happens, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Can I say one more thing?
Oh, yes.
This is a
please.
really exciting time to be in water recycling. On the front page of the January issue of the Journal of the American Water Works Association, it's integrating water reuse into your current water portfolio. It's a very exciting time. And the EPA just issued its action plan, its water reuse action plan moving forward. And so you're going to see water recycling programs and potable reuse where people are putting reclaimed water, treating it to drinking water standards, and pumping it right back into the drinking water system. We're going to start seeing that more and more all over the country. And so it's a really, really great time to be doing this.
We're just glad to hear the EPA's still there, Dawn. Russell?
How does upriver withdrawals impact, projected upriver withdrawals impact Athens' water supply? We draw from the North Oconee and Middle Oconee. What happens upstream?
Since we're so high up in the watershed, the withdrawals, there really aren't any other big systems upstream of us.
Are there any other long-term risks upstream that we should think about? Cows.
That's a loaded question. I don't know how to answer that right now. I can get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
As you see intense development at the very upper reaches, you're likely to get what they call flashier flows, where there's less water infiltrating into the ground and more doing surface runoff. So that means that when it rains, we'll have more than we're used to, and other times of the year, base flows may slowly decrease. This is like if I was looking 50 to 100 years into the future of our adjacent counties.
Great.
Marilyn, thanks a ton. Thank you. All right, everybody, hope you have a great evening. Thank you for playing.